Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this special joint event between the Schusterman Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Texas at Austin and the Schusterman Center for Judaic and Israel Studies at the University of Oklahoma. My name is Jonathan Kaplan, and I'm the director of the Schusterman Center for Jewish Studies here in Austin and an associate professor of Hebrew Bible and Early Judaism. On behalf of my colleague, Professor Rona Seidelman, who directs our sister center at the University of Oklahoma, I would like to welcome you to today's panel, Israeli Society After October 7th, Art and Archives. Both of our centers owe their origins to the visionary philanthropic support of Charles and Lynn Schusterman and the Schusterman family philanthropies. Our centers have for many years now exchanged faculty for lectures and gathered faculty for dinners and lunches at conferences. With the advent of the pandemic and the turn to Zoom, we've been afforded new opportunities to collaborate on events, and hence our fourth annual joint webinar. I would like to thank the Schusterman Center's Administrative Associate, Emily Petrovsky, and the OU Schusterman Center's Administrative Assistant, Trice Hyman, for their work on today's event. Before I welcome Professor Seidelman to introduce our speakers for this afternoon, a few practical comments. Since this is a webinar, you will have to pose your questions, and we very much hope that you will engage in discussion in the Q&A box on your Teams screen. Please feel free to add your questions as you have them, but we will only be responding to questions you put in the Q&A box and only at the end of our panelists' presentations. Professor Seidelman and I will pose these questions to our panelists after their presentations. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rona Seidelman, who is Associate Professor of History, is the incumbent of the Schusterman Chair of Israel Studies at the University of Oklahoma, and is the director of the Schusterman Center for Judaic and Israel Studies at OU. Her book, Under Quarantine, Immigrants and Disease at Israel's Gate, is a history of the Sha'ar HaAliyah camp, Israel's Ellis Island. Born and raised in Canada, Seidelman was educated at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and Ben Gurion University of the Negev. Please join me in welcoming Professor Seidelman.
Thank you so much, Professor Kaplan. It's a pleasure for me to be here today, and I want to thank Jonathan Kaplan and Emily Petrovsky and Trice Hyman for all their hard work in putting this panel together. And of course, thank you to our speakers and to everyone for being here today. On October 7th, 2023, so just over 1 year ago, thousands of Hamas members and other terrorists perpetrated a massacre in homes and communities in southern Israel, murdering around 1,200 people, the majority of whom were civilians. The terrorists took 251 hostages with them into Gaza. Today, over 100 hostages remain in Gaza. They include babies, women, and elderly men. We know from reports that they are being terribly abused. Adding to the horror of October 7th was the sheer brutality. The terrorists tortured, horrifically raped, mutilated, and decapitated their victims. They did this while filming themselves and celebrating their cruelty. It quickly became apparent that October 7th marked a turning point in the contemporary Jewish and contemporary Israeli experiences. As historian Aryeh Sapoznik has put it, I quote here, "There are moments of crisis in Jewish life that call out for renewed thinking and social, cultural, political transformation. October 7th is one such moment." In our panel today, we're honored to have two distinguished scholars who will speak to two aspects of this transformation in the fields of art and archives. I want to say preemptively that our focus today is on October 7th and not the broader war that continues to rage. Of course, there are forums and contexts in which we need to discuss these broader issues. But I think the easiest way for our North American audience to understand this is much like memorials for and events about 9/11. There is a time and place to discuss the devastation and the wars that followed 9/11. But there is also a much needed time and place to focus only on the American trauma. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to recognize that today in the United States, we are marking Indigenous Peoples Day. I hope our panel helps elucidate the complexity of identities, claims, and histories of Indigenous peoples around the world. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Dr. Amitai Mendelsohn is Senior Curator and Head of the Israeli Art Department at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. He holds a BA and MA in Art History from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a PhD from Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. His doctoral dissertation was adapted into the book, Behold the Man, Jesus in Israeli Art, which was published in both Hebrew and English. Among his numerous exhibitions and publications are Prophets and Visionaries, Reuven Rubin's Early Years, Real Time, Art in Israel from 1998 to 2008, Zoya Cherasky, Pravda, Raida Adon, Strangeness, and Sigalit Landau, The Burning Sea. Additionally, Dr. Mendelsohn has curated the permanent exhibition of Israeli art that is currently displayed at the Israel Museum. Dr. Raquel Ukeles is the head of collections of the National Library of Israel. From 2010 to 2020, she was curator of the Islam and Middle East collection. Ukeles is responsible for the overall development of all the library's collections and for digital, cultural, and educational initiatives based on the library's collections, as well as in partnership with other institutions. She is the chief editor of the book, 101 Treasures from the National Library of Israel, which came out in 2023. Since October 7th, Ukeles has spearheaded Bearing Witness, the National Library of Israel's long-term project to collect, preserve, and open access to a wide array of documentation materials related to October 7th and its aftermath, both in Israel and abroad. A New York native, Ukeles received her BA from Princeton and MA and PhD from Harvard University in 2006, all in comparative Islamic and Jewish studies. She also studied Jewish law in Jerusalem and New York, and Islamic law and Arabic in Egypt, Morocco, and the Netherlands. She has published and taught on a wide array of subjects related to Jewish intellectual history, Arab culture in Israeli society, Jewish and Islamic traditions, and the role of national libraries today. So with that, I will pass the microphone over to Professor Ukeles, who joins us in Jerusalem.
Hello, thank you so much for hosting this webinar and for giving me an opportunity to share a little bit about our work. I'm going to go ahead and share a PowerPoint right now. So we start here. And what we are looking at is a house that was burned down in a kibbutz called Be'eri in the south of Israel, in what is called the Gaza border communities. You can see from the caption that this was taken a month after October 7th by a photographer named Frederick Brenner. Frederick Brenner is a famous photographer who takes photographs all over the world. He spends part of his time in Israel, a lot of his time in France and in other places. And he came to Israel. He actually left his professional camera at home and decided he needed to go down and see for himself what had happened. But he, being a photographer, he could not resist. And so these are actually photographs. This is one of the photographs from his cell phone. And what he captured here is the jarring contrast we see between the destruction of this home and the continuation of nature above and below. And so I think it's a very powerful entry point to this work. This work that we started on October 9th and continue to develop. And I want to share a little bit about the project. Now, I'll say at the outset that we at the National Library, and I'll tell a little bit about what the National Library is in a moment, libraries are used to doing things retroactively. I would even say that libraries are most comfortable waiting for the dust to settle and to see what's important. You know, whose archive is going to be meaningful for understanding a field or literature, or what documents are going to be important. When it came to October 7th, we realized very quickly that we couldn't wait for the dust to settle. We had to move very quickly. This project of how do you document in real time the catastrophe, the massacre, and then the beginning of the war, and then the extended period that we're in, is unprecedented, definitely in Israel, and with the exception, I think, of what's going on in Ukraine right now, it's unprecedented in general. It's very hard to get your hands around the scale of this project. And so I wanted to start by showing you just a few minutes of an animated film that was made about the experience of one particular woman. Her name was Maya Alpha, and she was a participant in this rave, this festival called Nova, and hundreds of participants from the Nova Festival were massacred in the early morning of October 7th. So this is a film that is in Hebrew, but you'll see captions in English at the bottom.
אז קוראים לי מאיה, אני בת 25, גרה בגואטמלה, באגם הטיטלן, ומלמדת אנשים לנשום. קיבלתי הצעה לעבוד בפסטיבל הנובה, שזה מסיבת טרנס. Getting paid to be me, dancing and loving Mother Earth. אני הייתי בדרך לשירותים והתחילו האזעקות.